Welcome back to Gab with Alisa Profiles. I'm Alisa Costas, and this is my guest, David Norris. It's good to have you on the program.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
Now, you were born and raised in Chaptico, Maryland.
Yep, just about a mile up the road there.
And we should mention that we are at Christ Chaptico Church, and
Right.
this is a very historic location.
Yes, very historic. Raided by the British in the War of 1812, and it's much older than that, but it's quite a history.
Now, you grew up in stories, you know so much of the folklore and the history and the events that took place in this area.
Yes, it's been a lifelong gathering.
Well, tell me a little bit about your life. What was it like growing up in this area?
Well, we grew up, like I say, a mile up the road, up Hurry Road on my grandmother's farm, and it was about right in the middle of 4 cornfields. Our house stood back off the road. It was 4 cornfields all around us, and everything with wings visited us for just a little while. It was pretty neat.
That's an interesting way of putting it. You're talking bats and birds and
Birds
bugs.
and butterflies. Yeah, we had quite a butterfly collection.
Oh, did you?
It was had a huge mimosa tree in our front yard, which when we were kids we'd have picnics under, and it was a nice way to grow up.
Now, how many siblings did you have?
We had 7 children in our family.
Oh my goodness! And your mom really worked really hard to keep the family together and keep you guys,
Yeah, she was.
raise you.
She was great. She's been going for about 12 years now, but I have an identical twin brother, and my mom already had 3 kids when we came along, so she was practically a saint.
Absolutely. Now, talk a little bit about your love for the area, because you've incorporated a lot of things that you really care about into your music. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Chaptico is such a neat place. One time it was a bustling port town until the British came in the War of 1812, and then they captured all the wealthy tobacco merchants and marched them right down that road there to man of wars waiting off in the bay, and took them off to British prisons, never to come back home. And the whole economy of the town just collapsed. I mean, it was quite a shock. I mean, all the shipyards and everything that used to be here is gone now. But it's my brother and I, since we were little, have been finding spear points in the fields and all kinds of artifacts, and my mom had a lot of old things when we were growing up, and that really got us into a love for antiques and history and stuff like that.
Because you talked about the British coming into the port and what have you, but the history of this area actually even goes back even further, because Chaptico is an Indian word, so this is probably a big Indian settlement area, right?
10,000 years before the first white sail ever appeared on the horizon, Native Americans hunted on this land. You can find you can walk right off of that fence line there and find a spear point in the field. Guarantee you.
Now, also Chaptico
It means deep, broad river, which right off yonder there was a huge bay, and still is, but the hurricane of 1933 came up and filled all this in with about 3 feet of silt. Up to that point, there were houses across that road.
Okay.
And it was quite a thing. My mom told some stories about how when she was growing up as a young girl, that storms would come in and they'd wash the tide up over the swamp grass, and then the tide would recede, but it would leave these pockets of water that would just lay there and start molding, and then they would fester, and then they'd turn rot, and then methane bubbles would rise up out of the swamp. And St. Mary's County river water, I don't know if you know this or not, but it's phosphorus. It'll glow in the dark.
Okay.
If you take a stick and go like that, you'll see a purple trail fall on it.
Okay.
And these bubbles would rise up out of the swamp and float away across the field. These methane bubbles. And there was a story about 2 fellas being out here at Mattingly's store walking up the road one night, and they saw this light coming down the road, and they didn't hear no motor, and they didn't hear no horses' hooves, and they turned around and ran all the way back to Chaptico.
Oh, that is a really good story.
And they used to have these things in the old days called paper candles, that it was a little paper tray with a candle in it and had a little balloon over top of it. You light the candle and it would float away over the fields.
Wow.
But they set some barns on fire and they had to ban them.
Darn it.
They were pretty to watch, though.
Yeah, I bet they were. Well, I tell you what, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, you have some artifacts that you have found in this area that there's almost no telling how old they are, but we'll take a look at those and talk a little bit more about the history of this area and some of the things that you love.
Sure.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment. You're watching Gab with Alisa Profiles on MetroCast Channel 10.
Turn us on at www.phoenixintermedia.com.
Being your best is all about how you feel inside and out. If you feel good, you look good. Hi, I'm Dawn Campbell. Join me on MetroCast Channel 10 for Be Your Best. I'll show you creative ways to dress for success, give you quick health and fitness tips, and daily ideas for living the life you were meant to live. Be Your Best airs weekdays exclusively on MetroCast Channel 10 and is brought to you by Fitz Auto Mall.
You're watching Gab with Alisa Profiles, and my guest today is David Norris, born and raised in Chaptico, a lover of history, a musician, a storyteller, a songwriter, and just an all-around wonderful person to talk to. And you might be surprised to know that this is actually not David's first foray on television. You were on the History Channel.
Yes, in 2006 they had they did a thing called the Mayflower called Desperate Crossings, and I was an extra in it, so I was actually on television for a short period of time.
Ah, that's great.
It was cool.
You know, the more I get to meet and talk to people in Southern Maryland, the more you find it's true what they say about 15 minutes of big life, you know, and big fame. One of the things that we talked about in our last segment were some of the artifacts that you found out in the fields in this area and how far history goes back. And I know before we started filming, you pulled this out of your pocket, and then you pulled this out of your pocket, and then you pulled this really great thing out of your pocket. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've found in this area, because history in Chaptico goes back thousands of years.
10,000 years before the first white sail showed up on the horizon, there were Indians farming and hunting on this land. They were a woodland tribe, and we found points, spear point. This is the bottom half of a spear point. It's I found it sticking. It looks like the ace of spades, doesn't it?
It does.
And it's just beautiful. I found a tobacco field in Chaptico here.
You can absolutely picture where the point of the spear would have been right there.
Most projectile points that we find are real small, and some of them are very delicately made. It's amazing the craftsmanship that they had of the time. This I found out in the field just over yonder, and it's actually I think it's a tool. It's because it fits in your hand just perfect. I mean, just like right about like that. It'd be like a punch or a scraper or something. And the coup d'etat was this one. This
is a really neat piece.
It's a stone head. It's if you can see the ears highlighted there, and the eyebrow, and the shape of the face. This would have been a shaman's, and he would have had it on it, say. So that's like finding art in the field.
Oh, you betcha.
It's
that's
amazing.
A museum quality piece.
Yes, I'm not sure exactly how old that is, but it is pretty neat.
Now, you grew up with your siblings running these fields and just
well,
really
we worked
exploring.
in these fields. We hoed tobacco, and we cut tobacco and baled hay, and all manner of farms. My first job was right up the hill there in Red House Farm, so it was pretty cool.
Oh, that's neat, and that's interesting how there's more contemporary for us per se is Revolutionary War history. There's, as you have, Indian history, and then of course Chaptico as a town. You brought some of the photographs, and let's talk a little bit about each. Oh goodness, let's talk a little bit about each of these pictures that would have been from Chaptico. Tell me about these.
This was Goff's store, which stood in Chaptico in the late 1800s, but it's much earlier than that. The history goes way back, and I don't really know when it was built, but it was here an extra special long time. It was right at the end of this road that goes down here. It was the next thing you saw after you saw the church. You would have seen the tavern, because it was right at the end of the road there, and it was taken down in '79 by the new owner.
Okay.
And then photograph here is of Zach Fowler's store, and this stood right over here on Hurry Road, and this was taken in the late 1800s. It's kind of grainy photograph, as old ones are, but this is a more like 1960s photo of the same store much later. My mother's brother, Uncle Leo, my uncle was a manager here at the store, and he was such a good organizer that the man from Coca-Cola came down and saw the job he was doing and hired him on the spot. And he ended up as the vice president of the Coca-Cola Company.
Because of the way his store was put together?
Fredericksburg, Virginia, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He was the vice president of Coke in Fredericksburg, and my dad worked for Pepsi-Cola for 24 years. So
that must have been a fun family gathering.
Family picnics were interesting, yeah.
I thought that, having lived in the South, I thought Auburn, Alabama issues were tough. You get Pepsi and Coke in the same room.
And since then I've been collecting Pepsi stuff that my dad, since he worked for Pepsi, and he'll be 93 next month, my dad.
Really? Your dad's, that's great. That's really, I bet he can tell some really good stories.
He's got a few.
Okay, well, I tell you what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to get you to tell one of the stories, one of the shorter stories about the area here, and then you also have written a song about one of the roads that goes by this area, and we'll talk about that, because we want to mention again, and we want to thank everybody, we're at Christ Church in Chaptico. It's a very historic, beautiful building, and on another episode of Gab with Alisa Profiles, we're actually going to take a look at the church, and we're going to take a look at some of the historic sites that are in the graveyard here. We'll be back in a moment with more of Gab with Alisa Profiles with David Norris on Metrocast Channel 10.
Leonardtown, a most convenient place for shopping, dining, or even just wandering.
Leonardtown, a most entertaining place for things to do, sights to see, and fun for everyone.
Leonardtown, a most relaxing place for a quick visit, a lazy afternoon, or a long weekend.
Watch Leonardtown, a most convenient place. A new program exclusively on Metrocast Channel 10. Brought to you by Dan Burris's Old Town Insurance.
Hi, I'm Susan with Chesapeake Pet Resort and Day Spa in Hollywood, and I'm here with Rex in our big play yard, and we love using Metrocast Channel 10, and we've been on the Best Buy show, and it's been a great marketing tool for us. Rex agrees, and several of our friends out here. And we encourage everyone to check out Channel 10 and utilize the services with the Best Buy show.
Best Buy's works.
You're watching Gab with Alisa Profiles. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest today is David Norris. He's born and raised in Chaptico, Maryland, a lifelong Maryland resident, storyteller, songwriter, just an all-around terrifically interesting person to talk to. And David, I love talking to you because you know so much about the history, and it's not the history you read in the books. You might read the big pieces in the books, but you know almost history about people specifically on an individual basis. And we are at the historic Christ Church in Chaptico because this is the hub and the center of a lot of things that happen in this area. Specifically, I told everybody that you were going to talk about one of the stories that you know about this area, the War of 1812 and some things that happened here.
Right. The British came through, they docked their boats out there, and they also came marching. And everywhere that they went, there was a column of black smoke following them. And they arrested a lot of the local merchants and marched them down the river road right across yonder with all the hogsheads of tobaccos. Now, hogshead is an oak barrel. It's a huge, tall oak barrel that they pressed tobacco into and shipped it that way. And it was they seized them as prizes of war because they were highly prized. Tobacco was the commodity.
Sure.
And there went the economy of the town. It all collapsed into a sleepy little place that I grew up into. Nice for me, but it would have probably been the next Baltimore,
Really?
if that hadn't happened.
And this church was the site of British soldiers. You mentioned
They stabled the horses in the church. They tore the
just
church up. They had
goodness.
beautiful walnut pews. They mashed them to bits and used them to roast every purloined bit of goose and pigs and everything else they could get their hands on. They made barbecue pits out of the open graves and ravaged the Lady Keyes vault back there on the other side of the church, which is Francis Scott Key's grandparents. And meanwhile, he was in Baltimore writing the Star Spangled Banner.
There you go. So it's really, if you sit here and you kind of look around, you can almost picture in your mind this is a site of some really pretty violent events.
Right, and more hidden history in Chaptico, I think, than anywhere else I've ever been.
Now, you have spent a lot of time here. You talk about sitting up in the church and looking out the windows and working in the fields and things like that, but you've actually written a song about that march in 1812,
Well, it's
right?
about it's about the road itself.
About the road, okay.
And, I'll just play it for you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Down on the river road on a Friday night, young folks putting on their clothes, turning out the light. Right riding out in the warm air, not too far from the river where the past haunts the river road. Tired from the day and sun scorched, it's evening now and the full moon like a torch shines down river road. All that's left is memories, old stones that stand like sentries down off a river road. Down on the river road, home is calling and I must go down to the river road. So long, old timer, feel like I'm the last survivor left on the river road. I think it kind of has like a reference to, you know, knowing the history and all the stories that, you know, a lot of history, especially in this region, is oral history, and the more old folks we lose, the more of that history we lose, because the individual stories are the ones that really, you know, have the significance, because it's people's lives and what they went through.
You can kind of lose that flavor when you go through a class, you read a textbook, because you look at events as a broad picture, but when you start putting names to things and faces, so.
Whenever I go to the elementary schools and do programs with the kids, I always take one of my grandmother's my grandfather made handmade oak baskets. I mean, when it was raining, he couldn't get out in the fields, he would make white oak baskets. And they're beautiful. He made them like 80, 90 years ago, and they're still as pretty today and totally functional. And my, it's funny, my aunt used to come down to visit my mom when she lived up here at Grandmama's farm. And Grandma would give her a basket of eggs to take down here to Chapco to Zach Fowler's store and dare her to crack one of them and bring the money back to her. And it was a mile walk down here from Grandmama's farm.
And you didn't fool around.
No, you didn't mess around those days.
Well, David, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for letting us kind of mine the history of this area and just be a part of your life.
My pleasure.
All right.
Absolutely.
David Norris. Again, born and raised in Chapco, and really a wonderful storyteller, musician. You'll see him performing at different venues throughout Southern Maryland on a regular basis. And who knows, maybe one day your little peeps will come home and say, Mom, guess who talked to us at school today? So thanks for joining us.
Sure.
We'll see you next time on Gab with Alisa Profiles on MetroCast Channel 10.